Recently, Chris Stuckmann, a well-known YouTube movie reviewer who has been on the platform for quite a while now, has said in a recent video that he will not be criticising or critiquing the new Madam Web movie, and his video instead chose to focus on the Sony production company itself and how they have influenced their Spider-Man related films. Now, I'll get onto my point of view in a minute, but first I do want to say that he does bring some legitimate issues up with Sony, their past history with the Spider-Man centred films, their possible influence on the Madam Web film, and just the media industry in general, highlighting a variety of problems and weaknesses within the movie industry. For instance,
and I do think it comes down to the filmmaker they're working with and whether or not they back off and give that filmmaker the freedom they need to tell a cohesive, coherent story. When people have power over you as a creative, when they're paying your bills and they're paying you well, they can tell you to do anything and you have to do it.
This is absolutely a fair issue when it comes to filmmakers feeling pressured and micromanaged by the studios. While filming Avengers Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon revealed that when making the script and even during filming, Marvel execs would ask him to make changes to the story in order to try and expand the MCU. It's been heavily reported that there were many different endings made for this film, some of which even included the very much alive Quicksilver and even some having Captain Marvel in it, because the studio wanted to see their options, forcing less time to be spent on the main script, and more time focusing on making multiple different endings that most certainly wouldn't be used, as well as adding other small little subplots that would lead to future films. Another example would be the Josh Trank Fantastic Four film. Now, I have heard many of the stories and rumours about Josh Trank and his behaviour behind the scenes of the film, but as far as I'm aware, when they hired him to make this script, he was very forthcoming with the story he wanted to tell, only for Fox to come in after initially filming and force him to do rewrites and reshoots that contrasted heavily with what he wanted to make, which you can see by how different the film actually is compared to the initial trailer and promotion of it, with Trank himself saying that a great version of this movie exists, and it's nothing like this one. So yes, this is a legitimate issue that these studios cause to filmmakers and writers.
They probably don't care that much about each and every one of us who forks over our hard-earned money to sit in a theater on Valentine's Day when they could have been doing anything else.
This is also true. At the end of the day, this is a business that is trying to make money. And as such, in the end, I bet most executives are only interested in the final financial reward, not on what is going on during production or even the finished product, just how many people they got into the cinemas.
But in general, the industry has no idea what it's doing right now post-strikes. Nobody knows exactly what's happening right now because everyone is so beholden to this algorithm or whatever Netflix is telling them people want to see. This is creating an almost robotic-like dystopian conveyor belt of movies that we are essentially supposed to kneel at the very end of, open our mouth really wide and just consume, and then ask, when do we get the next conveyor belt thing that you have generated for us from your algorithm robotic AI thing?
So here Chris highlights that the abundance of strikes have dramatically changed the industry and how it operates, especially now that streaming platforms have become mainstreamed, and the studios involved are almost always focused on just making as much content as possible and pushing it out to justify their subscription services. As such, less time is being invested into actually growing and improving these scripts, and instead they are just being flung out at the audience and people are expected to drink it up. When The Mandelorian came out, you could tell by the writing that this was a clear passion project designed to expand the Star Wars universe, and it was received well by fans and the general audience. However, when you look at the rest of the Disney Plus shows, this sentiment has gone downhill from there, with things like the other 2 seasons of the show, Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka being more polarizing due to the clear lack of depth and creativity when it comes to the writing, which definitely has been influenced by this need to fulfill obligations and work around strikes. But I am going to have to come back to this point later in the video in a negative way. So, with these points, Chris is highlighting some real, genuine concerns about the media industry, especially in big Hollywood film production, and these are points that should be listened to. But at the same time, I have to disagree with him a lot in this video, for the following reasons.
The myriad of evidence that has been laid at all of our feet that this is a studio that is simply retaining the rights to their characters that does not care about the quality of this experience they're giving us.
So here's the thing, it is possible that you are correct, and that Sony are just releasing anything to retain these character rights and they're not actually caring about the final product. But they are not on the ground making the film as it's being shot. When I saw a scene where Cassie is clearly supposed to be shouting at the girls in the back of the taxi, but instead Dakota Johnson is just talking in a slightly louder voice than normal and is struggling to be authoritative in any way possible, that isn't Sony doing this. That's Dakota Johnson doing a bad take, and the director not getting another one, or instructing her on how she should be performing this scene. The same thing with some of the action. Towards the end of the movie, fireworks start to explode the roof, and the scene is supposed to be Cassie using her visions to predict where this shrapnel is going to appear, and then using a big piece of metal to block them from hitting the girls. But the scene is so poorly shot and the choreography is so bad that instead, it becomes a sequence of quick cuts, awkward slow motion, and Dakota Johnson not really reacting to anything as she awkwardly waves a piece of metal around, because the director and the choreographers had no idea how to shoot this scene. These are issues that are being made during the production of the film, throughout all of the film, and are not caused by a managerial meeting happening off-set.
It makes sense to make a Venom movie. It makes sense to make a Spider-Man movie. Those are characters that are going to generate money no matter what. Morbius and Madam Web, Kraven the Hunter remains to be seen. That is not the same level of reward that a studio might receive from producing a Spider-Man or a Venom movie. So why are they making them?
So first off, just because something is popular does not mean that they should not try new things and try and make them popular. If Sony didn't bother to try new things, then all we would have had is live action Peter Parker Spider-Man films that would go stale in a few years and leave Sony with nothing to market. As he points out, yes, they have had some less than stellar films, but they have also had incredible success with the Miles Morales Spider-Man movies, and you have to remember the fact that it was up to them to let Spider-Man into the MCU. And because they did this, because they tried something new and partnered with another company, despite the fact that this would mean they make less shares from the profits with another studio, they still chose to do this. And due to their willingness to do this, it allowed audiences to see new interactions for the character, bouncing off Iron Man and the Guardians and Doctor Strange, something audiences had never seen before and were incredibly receptive to. There is no reason why Sony shouldn't be trying new things and trying to get these characters and make them popular, despite the fact that there are better characters from this franchise. If studios only focused on popular things that were surefire to make a profit and didn't try and give anything else a chance, we would have no Iron Man, no Guardians of the Galaxy, no Peacemaker, no Aquaman. The only superhero media we would have is Spider-Man, Hulk, the X-Men, Batman and Superman, and it would be an incredibly boring movie genre.
A lot of spec scripts are not even being read. Very rarely, in fact.
So, you believe that the production studios are the reasons why these movies and TV shows are so poorly made. Yet here you are stating that most of the time the executives aren't even looking at the scripts before approving them for development. Madam Web was an absolutely terribly written movie. I have an entire video breaking down all the major plot points and events happening in it, and it's astoundingly bad. So if these executives aren't reading the scripts, then surely that means that most of the bad choices in this film is down to the writers? But in this video you essentially blame the studio for all of the negative impact of this film. So which one is it? And don't get me wrong, the studios have the responsibility to be going over these movies and ensuring they're good before production. So if they're just approving these scripts before checking them, that is also their fault. But this would be a choice of ignorance, while Chris is arguing throughout this video that these films are bad due to malicious interference with them. So are these executives malicious or are they ignorant? Because if you're blaming them for being ignorant and just approving these scripts, then it doesn't change the fact that these bad scripts were clearly written by people who are bad at writing, something you can't blame Sony for. Now, back onto the point I earlier praised.
But in general, the industry has no idea what it's doing right now post-strikes.
So it is true that the strikes and subscription services has caused a lot of roboticization in the media industry, pushing out bland, generic products for mass consumption. However, the main Madam Web script outline that was handed into Sony to be developed into a movie was in 2019, with this script then being approved and set into production by Sony. This is long before the abundance of strikes occurred due to this desire for production companies to just shit out content. It's a bit difficult to apply an issue that has been occurring heavily over the past 2 years to a script that was being worked on 3 years before these issues ever started to plague the industry.
Because when I watched Madam Web, there wasn't a single part of me that thought a writer sat down and came up with the idea of the final fight happening underneath a giant neon Pepsi Cola sign. I just don't think a writer sat in their apartment in LA and thought, that's a good idea.
Yes, product placement can be egregious in films, and having Pepsi be so in your face throughout the entire film is most likely due to Sony. However, that isn't anywhere close to being the worst thing about this scene. If this had been a good movie and this was a better fight scene, I would have been slightly annoyed by the blatant product placement, but that's it. The terrible part about this scene is how the big bad is killed by a sign, whether it was a Pepsi sign or not, and I highly doubt the Sony executives told this production crew, we want you to have the main bad guy just kinda stand on the the sign while the girls attack him in single combat, then have him awkwardly stumble around not attacking the main character and then getting crushed by a sign. I genuinely believe that the main bad guy was always going to be crushed by falling debris or some other sign, and it just so happened to be a Pepsi sign due to product placement, which doesn't change the overall issue that this is an absolutely terrible way to write a final boss. And last time I checked, the Sony executives aren't the writers. So in summary, can I believe that a Sony executive told the crew to make this a Pepsi sign? Absolutely. Do I believe it was the executive's idea for the big bad to pathetically fall off a building and then get crushed by a sign? No. In general, it seems that Chris is very reluctant to give any sort of criticism towards the actual people making these films, and I understand why he wants to be sympathetic towards them, especially as he is in the beginnings of joining these same people, but I don't think that's an excuse to not hold people accountable for the products that they create. I myself want to be involved in the media industry, a goal that was halted due to a variety of personal and financial issues, as well as the COVID pandemic. But that is still a goal I strive for, and if I got into the movie industry and I wrote a script or directed a movie that had a lot of flaws, I do not want to be coddled about my work. I want criticism so I can improve. The term peer review exists for a reason, and these reviews are vital for improving people's work because your peers are the people who are most likely to understand your thinking and explain improvements in a sincere way. He also brings up this idea that most executives aren't part of the creative industry, just individuals who either had the influence or money to become part of the power system that controls it. And that's a fair statement, but the idea that a creative might have the same mindset seems almost foreign to him. Like the idea that an individual in the creative industry might not fully understand how to be creative is a taboo concept, which I fail to understand why, because we've already seen that some people in the creative industry just aren't very good at it, with the big example famously being The Room. Tommy Wiseau had no master to answer to. He was entirely self-funded and had full creative control, and was given the opportunity to write, direct and choreograph the entire film. But in the end, the thing he poured his love and passion into just wasn't very good. But this idea doesn't even seem to cross Chris's mind, insisting to put all the blame on the executives, and he doesn't even consider that some of the people involved in the industry need a major re-education or guidance to be better creatives. Overall, Chris does bring up a lot of valid points about these sorts of movies, and weaknesses in the media industry as a whole, but as I showed in my video, a lot of the issues with Madam Web is not due to product placement, or reshoots, or trying to pander to a specific demographic. A lot of these problems are due to poor writing, poor directing, poor choreography, all of these issues which would only be the executives' fault if they were on the set doing these jobs instead of the directors and the production crew, which I think everyone can agree is a ludicrous thing to believe. So while I think Chris's heart is in the right place, I think he needs to stop acting like everyone involved in these sort of productions are flawless victims that had no control over the bad parts of their work. Thanks for watching, lads and lasses. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing and checking out some of my other videos. Sharing always helps, and if you're feeling really generous, please consider my Patreon or YouTube membership. I also have a Twitter and occasionally I do live streams. But overall, I just hope you had a great day and hopefully I will see you in the next video.